Welcome to How You Livin', a transformative podcast featuring best-selling author, inspirational speaker, and minister, Dr. Rick Rigsby. And now, Dr. Rick.
Hello, friends. Thanks so much for listening. I want to spend a few episodes discussing how to drive change in your life in a positive way. Whether you're setting goals or continuing professional development or desiring to make a few adjustments to your life, change is the prerequisite for growth. If we're not changing, we're not growing. When we don't grow, we invite stagnation, entropy, you might say. Entropy, the second law of thermodynamics, which suggests anything made up of a physical matter is in the process of decay and eventual chaos. Here's the bottom line. To merely exist in life, to coast without change, to be comfortable in one's position, promotes stagnation, encourages entropy. Not only that, we lose the benefit brought about by moving forward. A few years ago, Harvard Business Review completed a study of rank-and-file employee groups. Harvard asked this simple question: what generates the greatest degree of employee satisfaction? The answer may surprise you. It was not more pay or bonuses or time off work. Rather, it was when employees sensed forward momentum was taking place. Making positive changes, moving forward, decreases entropy, increases our level of overall satisfaction. You know, in talking with people from every strand of life, my profound sense is many who are stuck truly want to move forward. But wanting to move forward and actually moving forward are two separate issues. So the question becomes how? How does one advance and make positive changes? Answering this question in a pragmatic way is the objective for this series of podcast episodes. So friends, join me on this journey. Whether you need to make professional changes by growing your skill set or continuing your education, or whether you need to make personal changes like improving your mental health, dealing with addictions, seeking more quiet time for reflection, losing weight, getting in better shape, or saving money, whatever the change, let's work on developing a roadmap together. You see, this series is motivated by my decision to make positive changes necessary to improve my health. Simply stated, over the last couple of years, I've lost over 100 pounds. While that's a major achievement, that's not the greatest achievement in my books. I have incorporated simple, basic changes on a daily basis that have transformed my life. As crazy as this may sound to you, I firmly believe that losing weight is easy. Committing daily to the continual process of transformation, that's the challenge. Committing to the continued process of transformation. It's called positive forward momentum. Aristotle once said this: "You are what you repeatedly do. Therefore, excellence ought to be a habit, not an act." For years, my habit was to start strong, then fizzle out. I would stop and start. In fact, I stopped and started so many times I became frustrated. I had no plan for sustained change, no roadmap, no vision, just a desire. And I needed more than desire. Scripture states, without a vision, the people perish. And I certainly had no vision. And I was perishing, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally as well. In fact, I had even read James Clear's outstanding book, Atomic Habits, how small changes can produce massive results in one's life. I studied James Clear's lessons. As he was recovering from a massive head injury, he wrote these lessons that helped him to transform his life. Clear retrained himself by intentionally implementing basic habits to accomplish the smallest of tasks. His central argument was this: small habits exercised daily can have huge results. And I practiced those huge results. The problem was I would stop and start. Why? I had no game plan because I had no vision. And so I want you to use this series as a primer to help you develop your vision, to help you develop a game plan, starting with some first steps, if you will. I want to offer a philosophical base on which to build very practical steps that we can implement every day that will encourage positive change, that will encourage forward momentum in our lives. This is a common sense approach to making positive changes. From a philosophical perspective, my message is simple. My wisdom is biblically based. It was taught to me by my parents, reinforced by my father, the wisest man I've ever met in my life, that third grade dropout. My dad taught me that any kind of reasonable change for the better begins with the person in the mirror assuming responsibility. There it is right there. Any kind of reasonable change for the better begins with the person in the mirror. My father drilled this saying into my head: son, don't expect other people to do for you what you can do for yourself. In other words, assume responsibility. Look at the person in the mirror. That's where the change begins. Therefore, part one of this series is titled Responsibility. Friends, change will not occur unless we assume responsibility. Responsibility, simply defined, being accountable, then assuming control. Being accountable and assuming control. The problem for me was I wanted change, but I didn't want to pay the price. So step one, responsibility, requires paying the price. What is the price? Changing our mindset. In the words of psychologist Carol Dweck, people have one of two mindsets, either a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. We need the growth mindset because our flaw is that we try to make all these external changes without making any internal commitment. Without a growth mindset, our goal becomes nothing more than a dream or a wish. So let's focus on how assuming responsibility drives positive change. The first element that drives change, responsibility. When we assume responsibility for our actions and our behaviors, our responses and our words, we are forcing accountability into our lives. We're placing a demand upon our will to be intentional about change. While this seems like a small thing, the mental shift is seismic. You remember the outstanding book by Admiral William McRaven titled Make Your Bed? It was a simple book with a very profound message. When the Admiral was training to be a Navy SEAL, he discovered the power of accomplishing one simple task in the morning and how the completion of accomplishing that task placed a demand upon his discipline to accomplish more tasks. One small step every morning, making his bed, forced a new habit and increased his self-discipline. It also did something else. It developed a mindset of sustained change over a period of time. To fully embrace responsibility is the first step. We must now move from the philosophical to the pragmatic. To be completely accountable, we have to be transparent. Thus, the action step to improve personal responsibility is this. Friends, we must make a right estimate of where we are. Listen again. In order for us to achieve sustained change, we have to move from just a philosophical orientation to being pragmatic. To be completely accountable, we have to be transparent. We have to look at that man in the mirror, look at that woman in the mirror, look at that child in the mirror, and make a right estimate of who we are, of where we are. It was the great preacher Charles Spurgeon who said on one occasion, humility begins with making a right estimate of oneself. Consider the words from the Apostle Paul in the book of Romans, chapter 12, verse 3. I give each of you this warning. Do not think more highly of yourself than you ought think. Wow. You see, friends, one of the greatest challenges for humans is to carefully evaluate ourselves, to have an accurate estimate of where we are. You know, it's easy to make excuses. I was a master at making excuses. I've been heavy all my life. And so I would make justifications about my size rather than formulate a vision to lose weight. Here's a classic example of what I'm talking about. I recall my years of being on the football staff at Texas A&M University. On some occasions after a football game, a player would argue that he made a particular play or he made a particular block. And we didn't see him make the play. We didn't see him make the block, but the player would continue to press his point. However, there was always a day of reckoning videotape session the following day after a game. And during that videotape session, the truth would always be revealed. In more cases than not, the player did not make the play. The player did not make the block. He didn't pick up the linebacker or whatever the case. And I always found it fascinating that the player seemed to be the one that was the most shocked. That's us. That's me. It speaks to our human nature. You see, having a right estimate of ourselves requires courage. You have to look at yourself without looking through the lens of rosy-colored glasses. For whatever the reason, we've duped ourselves into thinking that we could not possibly be the problem. Have you ever listened to people discussing a breakup or a dismissal from a job? Granted, there are times when people are justified, but here's the point. If we begin the process of change by looking squarely and accurately at the person in the mirror, boy, what a great start toward improving our personal responsibility by forcing ourselves to be more accountable. This requires a shift from justification to acknowledgement. In other words, to assume responsibility, we can't blame others. We can't make excuses. Oh boy, this is where that great book comes in handy. Extreme Ownership, How the Navy SEALs Lead and Win by Jocko Willink and Leif Babbitt. Simply stated, these Navy SEALs said that in Navy SEAL life, if it's all about you, somebody dies. So how do you make sure it's not all about you? You don't blame others and you don't make excuses. I'm talking about growing our responsibility. I'm talking about making an impact. So, to summarize, assuming greater responsibility for our actions and words requires a right estimate of ourselves. If this step is missed, we cannot achieve accountability. Instead, we'll just continue justifying and blaming and looking for excuses. Here's the good news. As we take this responsibility by making an intentional commitment to be honest with ourselves, we can develop our vision, our game plan, our strategy for what needs to change and how to go about that change in a strategic way. Remember, small daily habits make huge improvements. When we accomplish these habits, our discipline grows, our mindset shifts from fix to growth. I learned this from my personal journey. You see, my excessive weight had always been categorized medically as being morbidly obese. That was the category that I fit into, morbidly obese. However, I just continued justifying my weight with statements like, I look okay, I feel okay. Lies, lies, all lies, stemming from a wrong estimate of myself. Momentum stopped. Forward progress ceased. I didn't have a right estimate of myself. As a result, I wasn't holding myself accountable. Momentum is generated when we remove taxes. Listen carefully. Blaming is a tax that slows us down. Excuse making, a tax that slows us down. Rather than moving forward in a positive way, our vision becomes co-opted by taxes that literally slow us down. So the first step when it comes to developing our roadmap, our vision, is looking at the person in the mirror and having the courage to be completely transparent and develop greater accountability. From this clear assessment, we develop a vision of where we are and what we need to accomplish. Next, we begin with developing small habits, one step at a time, like making our bed. This will change our mindset. It'll grow our discipline. Wow, those are two prerequisites that are essential to driving positive change. So start right there with those baby steps. Well, that's going to do it for this episode. Until we meet again, this is Dr. Rick, asking the most important question I can ask. How you living?
Are you ready to make an impact in your world right now? Do you want to stop existing and start living your best life right now? Dr. Rick wants to give you the first chapter of his best-selling book, Lessons from a Third Grade Dropout, absolutely free. Just go to www.rickrigsby.com/free gift to get the print or audiobook right now.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.